The city was cold and wet. A fine, chilly rain had been falling for hours, turning everything dark and shiny under the streetlights. It was the kind of November night that made people want to stay inside. But he was outside. He was a man on a job. He walked down the sidewalk, his hands in the pockets of his leather jacket. He wasn't dressed like someone who usually wore a suit. Tonight, he needed to look ordinary, like just another person in the neighborhood. He moved with a calm purpose, not too fast, not too slow. He was careful, but he didn't look nervous. His mind was on a car. A plain, beige sedan was parked halfway down the block under a streetlight that buzzed and flickered. That car was his goal. Inside it, hidden away, was a small piece of plastic, a flash drive. That little thing held numbers, bank accounts, and secret lists of names. It was the key to breaking open a dangerous group that had been hiding in plain sight for over a year. His team had worked for so long to get to this point. Tonight, his job was simple: walk to the car, get in, and drive away with the evidence. He was the last piece of the puzzle. He could see the car now. The rain made the roof and hood look like black glass. He felt the weight of the key fob in his hand. He was almost there. Just a few more steps. He was thinking about the drive ahead, about the safe place he needed to reach. He was not thinking about the police. Why would he? He was one of the good guys. But in this moment, in these wet, dark streets, he didn't look like a federal agent. He looked like a tall, strong man in a dark jacket, heading for a car in a quiet part of town. He reached the driver's side door. He lifted the key fob and pressed the button. The car's lights flashed once, and the locks made a solid thunk sound as they opened. It was a normal, everyday sound. Then, a different light flooded the scene. A harsh, blinding white light from behind him, instantly mixed with the swirling red and blue of police lights. The colors painted the wet street and the sides of buildings in a sudden, frantic dance. His body froze. His heart, which had been beating steady and slow, gave one hard, loud knock against his chest. His training kicked in, telling him to stay calm, to assess. But a colder, older feeling surfaced, too. A deep-down awareness of what this scene could mean for someone who looked like him. A voice cut through the patter of the rain. It was a young man's voice, tight with stress and trying to sound in control. "Don't move!" The words weren't just an order. They were a door slamming shut on his simple plan. The mission, the flash drive, the careful work of a year, all of it vanished, replaced by this single shining moment on a rain-slick street. He was no longer an agent. He was a man with his hands on a car roof, with the eyes of two police officers locked onto his back, and his real identity trapped inside the very car he was trying to enter. The voice that shouted, "Don't move," seemed to hang in the wet air. It was swallowed for a second by the sound of a car engine idling and the constant, light tap of the rain. He kept his hands flat on the cool, wet metal of the car roof. He could feel the water starting to run down his wrists and under the sleeves of his jacket. He didn't turn his head. He just stared straight ahead at his own faint reflection in the car window. In the dark glass, he could see the blurred, bright shape of the police car's spotlight behind him, and the moving shadows of the two officers getting out. He heard the heavy sound of their car doors shutting, one after the other. Then came the sound of boots on the wet street, a steady, careful squelch coming closer. His mind, trained for bad situations, started moving fast. It was like a checklist flicking on inside his head. Weapon? No, it was in the lockbox inside the car. Badge? Also in the box. Identification? In his wallet, in his back pocket. He was covered in rain, standing on a dark street, with nothing on him to prove who he really was. "Keep your hands where I can see them," the same voice shouted again. It was closer now. He could tell the officer was young. There was a shake in the voice that the man was trying to hide with loudness. "I'm not moving," he said, his own voice low and calm. It was the voice he used to talk to scared witnesses, to try and bring a tense moment down. "This is my car. I was just getting in. Step away from the vehicle." This was the other officer, an older voice, deeper and with less panic but no less firm. "Do it slow. Turn around and face me. Keep those hands up." He did exactly as he was told. He moved slowly, like he was underwater. He turned, his hands still raised near his shoulders, his palms open to show he had nothing in them. The spotlight was right in his eyes now, so he couldn't see their faces, just their dark shapes against all that blinding light. They were just outlines, one standing slightly behind the other, both with their hands resting on the butts of their guns. The rain fell in thin lines through the bright beam between them. The younger one, the one who had spoken first, was the one who came forward. He was all business, his movements stiff. "You got any weapons on you?" "No, sir," he answered. "Any ID?" "My driver's license is in my back pocket. My other identification is inside the car." The officer didn't like that answer. He could see the man's head tilt a little. "Other identification? What's that supposed to mean?" Before he could answer, the older officer spoke. "We got a call for a suspicious person trying car doors on this block. This vehicle matched the description. Let's just take this nice and easy." He nodded to the younger one. "Go ahead and pat him down." The younger officer stepped right up to him. "Place your hands on the roof of the car and spread your feet." He did it. He felt the officer's hands start patting him down, starting at his ankles and moving up. The hands were quick and firm, sliding over his jeans, his jacket, checking every place someone might hide something. He was being thorough. He found the wallet in the back pocket, tugged it out, and stepped back to look at it under his own flashlight as the officer flipped through the wallet. He spoke again, keeping his voice steady. "Officer, if you look in the car, on the floor under the passenger seat, there's a locked metal box. The key for it is on my key ring. If you open that, this whole situation will become clear." The younger officer ignored him, focused on the driver's license. The older one, however, seemed to be listening. "A locked box? What's in the box?" He took a small breath. This was the moment. He had to say it just right. He had to sound like he was in charge, not like he was arguing. "My official credentials," he said, each word clear and solid. "And my service weapon. I am a federal agent. I am on duty right now." For a second, the only sound was the rain and the idle of the police car. The two dark shapes just stood there. He could almost hear them thinking, trying to decide if this was a trick or the truth. The younger officer lowered the wallet and looked at his partner. The mission, the flash drive, the whole reason he was here, it was all balancing on what these two men decided to do next. The words "federal agent" seemed to just hang there in the drizzle. The younger officer, the one holding the wallet, let out a short, sharp breath that wasn't quite a laugh. It was a sound of disbelief. His posture didn't change. He was still coiled tight, ready for anything. The older officer was quiet for a few seconds longer. He took a single step to the side, moving out of the direct line of the spotlight so he could get a better look. The agent could finally see a little more of his face. A man in his 40s, with a tired but sharp expression, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. "Which agency?" the older officer asked, his voice flat. It wasn't a friendly question. It was a test. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," the agent replied. He kept his hands on the car roof. He didn't move a muscle. He knew any sudden shift now could undo everything. He spoke to the older officer, trying to make a connection. "My badge and ID are in that box. The key is on the ring your partner has. Sir, I am requesting you verify this. I am on a time-sensitive operation." The younger officer shook his head, flipping the wallet closed. "Anyone can say that," he said, almost to himself. He was convinced this was a lie, a desperate story from someone who'd been caught. He took a step forward. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." A cold knot tightened in the agent's stomach. This was going the wrong way fast. The procedure, the routine of the street was taking over. He was becoming a problem to be processed, not a person to be listened to. "Officer," he said, and this time he let a little more of his real authority into his voice. It wasn't a shout. It was lower, firmer. The voice he used in briefing rooms. "If you cuff me and take me in, you will be interfering with an active federal investigation. You will be taking a federal officer off a live mission. There will be consequences. Just check the box. It will take you 60 seconds. The older officer held up a hand, stopping his younger partner who was already reaching for his handcuffs. The older man's eyes were locked on the agent's face. He was looking for the sign of a bluff. He was looking at the calm, the direct eye contact, the lack of panic or anger. He was weighing the risk of looking foolish against the risk of making a very big mistake. The rain pattered on their shoulders. A car drove by at the far end of the street, its tires hissing on the wet pavement, its headlights sweeping over them for a second and then gone. "Give me the keys," the older officer said finally, his hand outstretched to his partner. The younger one hesitated. "Sarge, come on. This is—" "Give me the keys, Mike," the older man repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. The younger officer, Mike, slapped the key ring into his hand with a frustrated sigh. The older officer, the sergeant, walked slowly to the passenger side of the sedan. He used the key fob to unlock the doors. The car gave a soft chirp. He opened the passenger door, and the dome light inside clicked on, throwing a warm yellow glow into the rainy dark. He leaned in, his back to them. From his position, hands still on his own car roof, the agent could only watch. He could see the sergeant's back moving as he felt around under the seat. There was a metallic scrape, and then the sergeant straightened up. He was holding the heavy, gray metal lockbox. It looked official and out of place in the plain sedan. The sergeant walked back around the front of the car, the box in his hands. He held it up slightly. "This it?" "Yes, sir," the agent said. The small silver key on the ring. The sergeant found the key. He glanced at his partner, then back at the agent. For a moment, he just stood there with the box and the key, as if he was holding two different versions of the truth. One version was simple: a suspicious person in a bad neighborhood. The other version was complicated and full of paperwork and phone calls to angry superiors. He put the box down on the wet hood of the police car. The red and blue lights reflected and swam across its metal surface. He inserted the key, turned it, and lifted the lid. The agent couldn't see what was inside from where he stood, but he could see the sergeant's face. He saw the man's eyes change. They widened just a fraction. The hard, skeptical line of his mouth softened. It was a look of surprise, followed instantly by a deep, professional understanding. The sergeant reached into the box and pulled out the leather credential case. He flipped it open, angling it to catch the light from his own cruiser. The gold shield of the FBI would be gleaming there, next to a photo ID with an official seal. The sergeant stared at it for a long 5 seconds. He looked from the photo in the case to the man standing in the rain with his hands on the car. He looked back at the badge. Then he slowly closed the case with a soft, final snap. The sound of the credential case snapping shut was louder than it should have been. It cut through the noise of the rain and the idle engine. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The sergeant stood very still, holding the closed leather case in his hand. He looked down at it. Then he looked back at the man by the car. His expression had completely changed. The tight, suspicious look was gone. Now he just looked tired, and a little bit like he'd just stepped into a big mess that he cleared his throat. "Mike," he said to the younger officer. His voice was low and even. "Come here for a second." The younger officer, Mike, who had been standing tense and ready, gave the agent one last hard look, then walked over to his sergeant. The sergeant held the credential case out, flipping it open again so Mike could see it clearly. He didn't say a word. Mike leaned in, his eyes squinting. He saw the badge. He saw the photo. He read the information. His shoulders, which had been up near his ears with tension, dropped all at once. His face went through a quick series of changes: confusion, disbelief, and then a slow, sinking realization. His mouth opened a little, but no sound came out. He just stared. The sergeant closed the case again. He walked back around the front of the cars, his boots making wet sounds on the asphalt. He stopped a few feet from the agent, who was still standing with his hands on the car roof, waiting. The sergeant held the credential case out to him. "You can put your hands down, agent," the sergeant said. His tone was formal now, respectful, but there was a heavy layer of something else underneath. It was embarrassment, maybe, or frustration at the situation itself. The agent slowly lowered his arms. They felt stiff from being held up and from the cold. He took the leather case from the sergeant's hand. His own fingers were damp. He didn't open it. He just held it. The weight of it in his palm felt like the weight of the whole strange, messed up night. We had a call. The sergeant started to explain. He was talking like someone who had to give a report. A neighbor reported seeing someone out here trying car door handles on this block about 20 minutes ago. The description they gave was vague. A man in a dark jacket. Your vehicle here was the only one matching part of the description in the area. We were just following up. The agent nodded slowly. He understood procedure. He'd done it himself 100 times. But understanding it didn't take away the cold feeling in his gut. The feeling of having been turned from a hunter into a target in his own city. It's your job to check, the agent said. His voice was quiet, not angry. It was just a statement of fact. He was trying to keep the emotion out of it, for his own sake as much as theirs. The mission was still ticking in the back of his mind, a clock he could hear counting down. The younger officer, Mike, had walked over now. He stood a step behind his sergeant, not meeting the agent's eyes. He looked at the ground, at the rain making circles in a puddle. His face was pale. The sergeant shifted his weight. We need to secure this, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the open lockbox still sitting on the police car's hood. Inside, next to where the credentials had been, was the agent's service weapon. Procedure. Of course, the agent said. He walked over to the police car. He could feel both officers watching his every move. He reached into the lockbox and took out his gun. He made sure his fingers were nowhere near the trigger. He held it carefully by the grip, showing it clearly, and then he placed it back in the lockbox. He closed the lid and turned the key, locking it. He pulled the key out and put it in his pocket. There, he said. It's secured. It stays in my vehicle under my control. That should satisfy procedure. The sergeant nodded, looking relieved that one part of this awkward situation was handled. There was another long pause. The three men just stood there in the rain, a little triangle of silence in the flashing lights. The agent knew he needed to go. Every second was a risk. The people he was investigating weren't patient. If they had any idea this car was being watched, the whole operation could burn. But there was something hanging in the air, something that needed to be said, and it wasn't coming from the officers. Finally, the sergeant spoke again. He seemed to be choosing his words with great care. Agent, I want to apologize for the inconvenience. This was a case of mistaken identity. We were acting on the information we had. The agent looked at him, then at the younger officer who was still studying the puddle. He thought about the word inconvenience. It was such a small word for what had just happened. It wasn't just about being late. It was about the hand on the gun, the shout in the dark, the feeling of being completely powerless in a situation where he held all the power just a few feet away. Locked in a box that he didn't say any of that. He just gave a single, slow nod. Apology accepted, Sergeant. He looked toward his car. Now, I really have to get back to my duty. He turned and walked the few steps back to the driver's side door of his sedan. The dome light was still on from when the sergeant had opened it. The inside of the car looked warm and dry and normal. It looked like a place where he was in charge. He just wanted to get back to that. He opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat. The inside of the car was quiet, a sudden pocket of silence compared to the rain and the police radio chatter outside. The familiar smell of the car, of old coffee and clean vinyl, hit him, felt like putting on a different skin. For the first time since the lights had flashed, he could breathe a little easier. But the moment wasn't over. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see the two officers talking. The younger one, Mike, was waving a hand, his face animated. He was clearly upset. The sergeant stood with his arms crossed, listening. Then he said something sharp and short that made Mike stop talking and look at the ground. The sergeant then turned and started walking toward the sedan. A tap came on the passenger side window. The agent leaned over and unlocked the door. The sergeant opened it but didn't get in. He just stood in the rain, leaning down, his face looking older in the dim car light. Agent, the sergeant said. Before you go, we need to square this away. Officially. He sounded like a man who knew a lot about paperwork and covering bases. The agent nodded, his hand still on the key, ready to turn the ignition. What do you need? I need to see the driver's license. The one from your wallet. And I need to log your badge number. Just for my report. To show I verified. The sergeant's voice was polite, but firm. He was still doing his job, even now. He had to write the stop down, and he needed the details to be correct. The agent understood. He reached back, took his wallet from his pocket where the younger officer had put it on the roof of the car, and pulled out his driver's license. He handed it over. Then he opened his credential case again, holding it so the sergeant could see the number. The sergeant pulled a small notebook from his chest pocket. The pages were damp at the edges. He copied the information carefully, squinting in the poor light. He handed the license back. Thank you. There was another awkward pause. The sergeant didn't close the door. He seemed to be wrestling with something else. My partner, the sergeant said finally, glancing back toward the cruiser. He's a good kid. Just green. He sees a call, he sees a car that fits, he goes with his training. It's all he knows right now. The agent didn't say anything. He just listened. He knew the sergeant wasn't just making an excuse for his partner. He was trying to explain it to himself, too. The call we got, the sergeant continued, his voice dropping a little. The person who called it in. They said the man they saw was acting suspicious. You know how it is. That can mean anything. Or it can mean nothing. He shook his head, a tiny movement. It doesn't matter now. I just wanted you to know the chain of it. The agent looked past the sergeant, out at the street still painted in swirling red and blue. He thought about the neighbor, looking out a window through the rain, seeing a shape, making a decision to pick up the phone. He thought about the radio call, the description, the officers rolling up, their hearts beating a little faster. It was a chain, all right, a chain of small decisions that led to a big moment. It matters, the agent said quietly. It always matters. The sergeant met his eyes then, and for a second, they weren't a cop and a federal agent. They were just two tired men in the rain, stuck in a machine that kept turning, whether they wanted it to or not. I'm going to need you to wait just a minute more, the sergeant said, straightening up. I have to call this in to my dispatcher. Tell them the situation is resolved, that it was an official encounter. If I don't, they'll send backup wondering why we've been stopped here so long. It'll cause more noise. The agent felt a jolt of urgency. More noise was the last thing he needed. But he knew the sergeant was right. Okay, make it fast, please. The sergeant nodded, closed the passenger door, and walked back to his cruiser. The agent watched him pick up the radio microphone inside. He could see him talking, calm and clear. He saw the younger officer get into the passenger seat, his head in his hands. Sitting alone in his car, the agent finally let himself feel the weight of what had almost happened. His heart, which had been steady through the whole thing, started to beat harder now, a delayed reaction. His fingers tapped on the steering wheel. He looked at the lockbox on the floor. Inside it was the flash drive. It was still safe. That was the only thing that mattered. That was the mission. But another part of him, a part he usually kept locked down tight, was shouting. It was angry. It was humiliated. All his training, all his years of service, all the times he had been the one in the uniform asking the questions. None of it had mattered in those first few minutes. On that street, in the eyes of those officers, he had been reduced to a single fact. A man in the wrong place. He took a deep, slow breath. He pushed that feeling down, back into the box where he kept things he couldn't deal with right now. He had a job to finish. In the cruiser. The sergeant hung up the microphone. The flashing red and blue lights suddenly switched off. The street was plunged into a deeper, quieter darkness, lit only by the yellow glow of the street lamps and the drizzle. The sudden normalcy was almost shocking. The sergeant got out and gave the agent a thumbs up. It was an awkward, informal signal. It was over. The sudden darkness when the police lights went off felt heavy. For a few seconds, his eyes had to adjust. The world went back to just being a wet street at night, quiet and cold. The sergeant's thumbs up was a strange little signal in the gloom. It meant he was free to go. But nothing felt simple. He turned the key in the ignition. The engine came to life with a soft, steady hum. He clicked his seatbelt into place. The sound loud in the quiet car. A normal sound. He looked into the rearview mirror. The police cruiser was just sitting there now, a dark shape with its headlights still on, casting two long cones of light on the wet road ahead of it. They weren't leaving. They were waiting for him to leave first. It was part of the dance, the unspoken end to their official encounter. He put the car in drive and pulled slowly away from the curb. The tires made a soft, wet sound. As he passed the cruiser, he kept his eyes straight ahead. He didn't look at the officers. He didn't want to see their faces anymore. In his mirror, he saw the cruiser's headlights shift as it finally began to move, turning in the opposite direction. Going back to its regular patrol, he was alone. For the first 2 blocks, he drove on pure habit. Stop at the sign. Signal the turn. His mind was racing in 2 different directions at once. One part was all business, clicking back into gear. He had to get to the safe house. He had to deliver the drive. He needed to call in and give a quick, coded all clear, so the team knew he was okay and still moving. He started planning the rest of his night, the route he would take, the checks he would make to be sure he wasn't followed. The other part of his mind was still back on that street corner. It was playing the whole thing over again in a loop. The blinding light, the shout, the feeling of the cold car roof under his palms, the sound of the younger officer's voice, so sure he was doing the right thing. He thought about what the sergeant had said. He's a good kid, just green. He goes with his training. His own training had told him to be calm, to comply, to de-escalate. And he had done that. It had worked. But a bitter thought crept in. Would his training have worked if the sergeant hadn't been there? If it had just been the younger officer, full of nervous energy and a vague description? Would he be in the back of a squad car right now, trying to get someone at the field office to answer a phone in the middle of the night? He shook his head, trying to clear it. He couldn't think like that. It didn't help. The mission was what helped. The mission was real. He took a turn onto a busier street. The traffic was light. Normal people were driving home from late shifts or from visiting friends. They had no idea what was in the car next to them. He reached down and tapped the lockbox with his shoe, just to feel it was still there. It was. After a few more minutes, he pulled into the parking lot of a closed hardware store. It was a prearranged spot for a safe check-in. He parked in the shadows at the back, away from the streetlights. He took out a plain, basic cell phone, a burner phone, and sent a single text message. Just one word, moving. The reply came almost instantly. Acknowledged. Good. The team knew he was active. He put the phone away and sat for a moment in the dark, his hands resting on the wheel. The adrenaline was finally starting to drain away, leaving him feeling very tired. The quiet of the empty lot was different from the quiet on the street. This was a chosen quiet. It was under his control. He thought about the flash drive again. The information on it could put dangerous people away for a long time. It could stop plans that would hurt innocent folks. That was why he did this job. That was the point of all the training, all the risk, all the nights spent in cars just like this one. But tonight, for a little while, he hadn't been the protector. He had been the one who needed protection from the very system he worked for. The irony of it was so thick he could almost taste it, a metallic taste at the back of his throat. He took another deep breath, letting it out slowly. He couldn't sit here all night. He had a package to deliver. He started the car again and drove out of the lot, merging back into the thin stream of traffic. He was focused now, his eyes checking mirrors, watching the patterns of the cars around him. He was back in the rhythm of the operation. But deep down, under the focus, a small, cold stone had settled. It was the memory of those flashing lights, and the knowledge that next time, there might not be a tired, careful sergeant there to open a lockbox. Next time, the chain of small decisions might have a different ending. He pushed the car a little faster, eager now to finish the job and get off the streets. The safe house was a small, plain apartment in a building that looked like all the others on the block. He parked a street over and walked the rest of the way, the lockbox carried in a simple grocery bag. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air clean and cold. His footsteps were the only sound. He knocked on the door in a specific pattern. It opened immediately. A woman he knew only as Jones stood there. She was in her 40s, dressed in sweatpants and a hoodie, looking like anyone else having a late night at home. She didn't smile. Her eyes went straight to the bag. "Been waiting," she said, stepping back to let him in. The apartment was sparse. A table with a laptop, couple of chairs. The blinds were drawn tight. He placed the bag on the table, opened the lockbox, and handed her the flash drive. She took it without a word and plugged it into the laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her eyes fixed on the screen as lines of data began to scroll. He stood back, watching her work. The mission was literally in her hands now. The tension that had been coiled in his shoulders since he first saw the police lights began, slowly, to unwind. It was done. The retrieval was complete. After a few minutes, Jones gave a short, sharp nod. "It's all here, clean, untouched." She finally looked up at him. "Any problems?" He paused. The question was standard. He was supposed to report any issues, any signs he was followed, any unusual events. The two police officers, the flashing lights, the hand on his back. It was all unusual. It was a risk to the operation that needed to be logged. But as he opened his mouth to give the official, clipped report, he stopped. He saw the sergeant's tired face. He heard the younger officer's shaky voice shouting in the dark. He thought about the report the sergeant would have to file, the story he would have to tell his own bosses. "No," he heard himself say. His voice was calm, flat. "No problems. A clean pickup." Jones stared at him for a second longer, her eyes sharp. She was good at her job. She might have sensed he was leaving something out, but she didn't push. She just nodded again and went back to the data. "Good. We'll start the analysis. You're done. Get some rest." He was dismissed. Just like that, his part was over. He should have felt relief, maybe even a flicker of pride. But as he left the quiet apartment and stepped back out into the cold night, all he felt was empty. The walk back to his car felt longer. The city was quiet now, settled in. He drove home, the streets familiar and empty. He pulled into his own driveway, a normal house on a normal street. He went inside, turned on a light, and put the lockbox on his kitchen table. He took out his service weapon, cleared it, and put it in its safe. He placed his badge and credentials next to it. He stood there for a long time, just looking at them. The gold shield gleamed under the kitchen light. It was a symbol of authority, of trust, of the law. But tonight, for a little while, it had been meaningless. It had been locked in a box, useless. While the real world happened outside, he thought about calling his partner or his supervisor. He thought about telling the story, about the inconvenience. They would understand. They might even joke about it. "Rough night, huh?" But the words felt stuck in his throat. Instead, he made a cup of tea and sat at the table. He replayed it all one more time, not as an agent, but just as a man. The fear, quick and cold, when the lights first hit him. The frustration when they wouldn't listen. The strange, hollow feeling when the sergeant apologized. It wasn't about anger towards those officers. They were just pieces in the machine. It was about the machine itself, a machine that could so easily grind you down. Badge or no badge. He finished his tea and washed the cup. He went through his normal routine, getting ready for bed. But as he lay in the dark, sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept going back to the very end, to the moment he drove away. He saw the police cruiser in his rearview mirror, its lights finally off. He saw himself driving into the night, the mission back on track. He had won. He had gotten the job done against a small, stupid obstacle. But the win didn't feel good. It just felt like a reminder that every time he put on his street clothes instead of his suit, he was taking a chance. He was stepping into a space where his real identity was invisible. And another, older story took over. He stared at the ceiling. The operation was a success. The bad guys would be found because of the work he did tonight. That was what mattered. That was why he did this. He closed his eyes, forcing his breathing to slow. The image of the flashing lights began to fade. replaced by the steady scroll of data on Jones's computer screen. The work was what remained. The work was always what remained. Tomorrow he would put on the suit again. He would be the agent, not the man in the dark jacket. But for tonight, in the quiet dark, he let himself remember what it felt like to be just the man on the street, waiting for someone in authority to decide who he was.